Okay, calculating odds. All right, so in the last lesson we talked about probability, right? So like the probability of something happening, to give you an example. Looked like, let's say probability of, let's say, rolling a 5 or 6 on a die, right? So that would be the probability of a 5 or 6, let's say. Then, okay, well, what would that be? Is it going to be a 5 or 6? So that'd be 2. And then out of 6 total, right? There's 6 things it could be. So that probability would be 1 over 3, right? Or 0.33 repeated, or 33%. Right? So we can say all of that with probability. Now, odds is a little bit different. So odds, you've probably heard that word, like what are the odds of this thing happening? What are the odds of that thing happening? So a lot of times in casinos, they'll talk about the odds. You have a certain amount of winning, a certain amount of losing, right? Odds and probability are very similar, but they are different. They have different meanings. So when we say odds, well, let's look back at this. So remember in the last one, I'll kind of compare this. So before, odds was, or sorry, probability, we'd say the probability of an event happening. So I'll say here, probability of an event was equal to, and then you remember how I said it was favorable over total? Okay, so that was probability. Now what we got going on is with odds, odds is going to be our favorable and then dot dot unfavorable. Okay? This one's not on your formula sheet, so we'll have to memorize this. But, okay, so the way this works, let's say, well, let's look at this example. So it says, find the odds for an event of tossing a coin and getting heads. Okay, so let's do both. Let's actually find probability and find the odds. So the probability of flipping a coin and getting heads would be, okay, so probability of, I'll say probability of heads would be favorable over total. Okay, well, there's only one head, so I'll say 1 over 2, which would be 0.5 or 50%, right? So you could say both of those things for probability. Now, it's a little bit different with the odds. With the odds, we would say it's going to be, so odds is going to be equal to, here, I'll do an arrow there, is going to be favorable, dot, dot, right? Just our 2 dots like that. Unfavorable, so unfave. Okay, so what that means then, in our case with the odds of getting a heads, would just be 1, right, of getting the heads, and then the unfavorable will be getting tails, so that'd be 1 to 1. So that's what you would say there. You'd say that the odds, you have 1 to 1 odds. Okay? 50% probability, but 1 to 1 odds. Okay, so favorable to unfavorable. Okay, so now that we know that, we can do some other questions. So let's say find the odds of rolling a die and getting a 3. Okay, so the odds of getting a 3 is equal to the number of ways of getting a 3, dot dot, the number of ways to not get a 3. So in this case, you'd say, well, there's one way to get a 3, right? There's just getting that 3 on the die. And then dot dot, and then the other ones are going to be all of the other numbers you could get, right? You could get a 1, a 2, a 4, a 5, a 6. Oop, sorry, just dropped my pen. Okay. So all the other ones would add up to 5, right? You have 5 other things that you could get. So that's the unfavorable there, right? Okay, so now, so now it says, look carefully at the example above. This illustrates the need to avoid confusion between odds and probability, right? We know that the probability of getting a 3 is 1 to 6, right? So 1 to 6 probability, or 1 in 6 is how you would say that. But the odds would be 1 to 5. Do you see how what the difference is there? The first one, the probability, was 1 over the total, right? 1 out of a total of 6. And the odds was 1 to 5. Now, this is where the confusion could be, and this is typically why we write probability as a fraction or a ratio like this, and we write odds as the dot dot like this one, right? And that's just to kind of help the confusion where we know what we're talking about. If you see something written as a fraction, it means probability. Something written like this with a dot dot, that we're talking about odds typically. Okay. So let's keep going. So you were told that the probability of a tornado hitting your home during the month of May is 0.15. Okay. Find the odds for the tornado hitting your home during May. All right. So what we got going on here? 0.15. Right? Do you remember how? So that's a probability. And probabilities are between 0 and 1, right? So another way of saying this, just so we can review this, 0.15, that would also be 15% probability, right? Okay, so now that we know that, probability of a tornado hitting is 0.15 or 15 out of 100, right? That's what 0.15 would be written as, right? Where the 5 is in the 100th spot. So we can rewrite that as 15 over 100. Okay, so that's our favorable in this case, right? That's going to be favorable over total. Total. All right, but if we're doing odds, we don't want favorable over total. We want favorable dot dot unfavorable. All right, so if that's the case, then what we're going to do is we're going to say, okay, favorable is 15, and then here's the big question. What's the unfavorable, right? Well, that would be everything else. So if it was 100 was our total, then everything else would be 85, right? Does that make sense? So favorable and then everything else, that's our unfavorable. So now we can simplify this the same way that you'd simplify a fraction like 15 over 85, right? Even though it's written side by side, it's still a ratio. We're going to just divide the top and bottom, or both of these, by 3. So we can divide it by 3, divide it by 3. So that's going to be the same thing as 3 dot dot 17. So we would say the odds of the tornado happening are going to be 3 to 17. 3 chances of it happening, 17 chances of it not happening, right? Favorable and unfavorable. Okay, example 9. Find the odds for tossing 4 coins and getting exactly 3 tails. Okay, so in this example, we first need to determine what all the possible outcomes are when you toss 4 coins. So here's a list of everything. So if you were making this list of all the possibilities that we could do, right? This would be like 1 coin, 2 coin, 3 coins, and the 4th coin. So there is a chance that we flip them all and we get heads for each, right? And then you could write them all out. We could also have, you know, all heads, like 1, 2, 3 heads, except for the last one could be tails. And then heads, heads, tails, tails. And then 1 head and 3 tails, right? So it said find the odds of tossing 4 coins and getting exactly 3 tails. So that would be one of them, one of the possibilities. The other one would look like this, right? Tails, tails, heads, tails. The other one would be tails, 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 heads. And the other one would be tails, heads, tails, tails, right? So you just kind of write them all out. This is also a sample space, right? In the end, right, after we've done that, we can see that we have 4 outcomes where we have exactly 3 tails, right? We've got heads, tails, 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 heads, tails, 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 heads, and tails, heads, tails, tails. Okay, so those are all the different ways we could do that, right? Okay, so if we do that, we see that there's 4 ways that we can do it. And then there's 12, well, if you count all the other ones, there's 12 ways that you cannot get those, right? So it's going to be 4 to 12, which would just be the same thing, simplifying again, as 1 to 3 odds. Okay, so now, finding odds against an event. Okay, so most gambling applications involve calculating and reporting the odds against an event. So the odds against an event are given by a ratio, just like the odds for an event, so it's the same type of thing. And this one, really, just watch. All that's happening here is you're going to flip these ones around. So if you're going for odds against an event, then that's just going to be unfavorable to favorable, right? Notice that all we did was swap the 2. Okay, which makes sense, right? You're just finding the other part of it. Okay, so if we look at our example in the last one, right, it says find the odds against tossing 4 coins and getting exactly 3 tails. So remember in the last one we said that it was, well, what did we say? That ended up being 1 to 3 odds. Okay, 1 to 3 odds. for getting exactly 3 tails. So if I want to have against having 3 tails, well, that's as simple as just swapping those two, right? That would be 3 to 1. Okay? Easy as that. All right. Experts calculate the probability of a particular horse winning the Kentucky Derby to be 0.2. So 20% is another way of saying that. Calculate the odds against the horse winning the race. All right, so let's kind of see what we're looking at here. So if we've got 0.2, so if we have a probability of 0.2, let's think about what that means, right? That's the same thing as, well, 20 over 100, or a little bit simpler, let's call that 2 over 10. And let's simplify that even more, the 0.2 as 1 over 5, right? So you could say we have a probability of 1 over 5. Now remember, the top is our favorable and the bottom is our total. All right, so you know what would be an easy way to do this? Let's figure out what the odds for the horse winning is, right? So the odds for the horse winning would be, so odds for would be 1, right? That was our favorable, dot, dot. Now what's our unfavorable? Is it going to be 5? No, right? 5 is our total. Unfavorable is going to be everything else. So if it's 1 over a total of 5, then everything else must be 4, right? 5 minus 1. It's going to be everything else. 1 to 4 odds for winning. Okay, well, if we want unfavorable, that's as simple as just swapping those two things around, right? This was 1 favorable to 4 unfavorable. And if it says what are the odds against the horse winning, then that's going to be 4 to 1. Just switch them around. Okay, so that's the idea, guys. I'll see you in the next lesson.